Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for Monday, February 8th, 2021. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about the latest film and TV news. My name is Ben Pearson. I'm the senior writer at slashfilm.com, and I am joined on today's episode by Slash Film managing editor Jacob Hall.
Hello, hello.
And writer Chris Evangelista.
Hello.
Good morning, everyone. Happy Monday. Let's dive right into the news. Chris, I think you wrote what may be the most interesting not to set us up as a top-heavy episode or anything, but maybe the most interesting story that we're going to talk about today is a new project from director Chloe Zhao. What does she have in the works?
She is doing a new version of Dracula for Universal, and this sounds unlike any Dracula we've seen before because it's described as a, quote, futuristic sci-fi Western. There have been plenty of Western themed vampire movies before. I mean, Near Dark is a great example. That's a great movie. And there's even been a Western Dracula movie before. There's a 1966 film called Billy the Kid versus Dracula, and it's terrible. But there's never really been one quite like this, a futuristic sci-fi Western version of Dracula. We don't know a whole lot about it. We just know that that's the concept. It's going to deal with characters on society's fringes, and that's really the most of it. Chloe Zhao is going to write and direct it, which is very exciting because she's a exciting filmmaker, and the idea of her taking this on is very cool. We know this is sort of part of Universal's ongoing attempt to revive their classic monsters. You know, they infamously tried this with the Dark Universe and the Mummy, and that failed. And they kind of went back to the drawing board and restarted all over again with Lee Whannell's The Invisible Man. We also know that there's another Dracula movie in development at Blumhouse, but it's not officially set up at Universal. And that movie's coming from Karen Kusama, who directed what did she direct?
She directed
The Invitation.
The Invitation. I was going to say Widows. That's completely wrong. The Invitation. She's a great filmmaker. Destroyer is a wonderful movie that no one saw, but I thought it was fantastic. So it's probably inevitable that project will end up at Universal because Blumhouse, Universal have a deal together, but it's not officially there yet. But I was able to confirm through a source that as of now, both projects are in development. So, Universal isn't killing off the Karen Kusama one to make this one. So, yeah.
Okay, so Jacob, I know that you're a big Dracula fan. What do you think about this very specific, very unique take on that story?
Dracula is malleable enough at this point to pretty much go anywhere and do anything. So I'm happy that someone is doing something unique with Dracula, and it's interesting because it sounds like a total B movie. Like the kind of early 70s trash you'd see Italians make to make a quick buck, released dubbed in the United States. But the director of Nomadland and Eternals and the writer doing that immediately makes me so interested in it and beyond it being a B movie pleasure. So I really want to know what's up. I saw somebody on social media say this, so I'm going to quote it here or paraphrase it here. What if this is essentially Dracula and Mad Max, where in a post-apocalyptic landscape where everybody's fighting for survival, trying to find food and water, Dracula just needs to find blood, and maybe that's what they mean by sci-fi. I'm very curious if that's the angle they're going for here, or if it's actually Dracula in space. Who knows?
Interesting. So, Chris, I just want to, before we move on, I want to get your take on, Chloe Zhao has like a very specific style. I'm not exactly sure how to define it, but it's a sort of an intimate style, almost like a documentary kind of vibe. Applying that to, and I don't know if she's going to apply that same style that she's developed over the past few movies to this Dracula project, but it's very possible that she just completely eschews that and embraces a totally different aesthetic and feel for this movie. But if she were to apply that kind of vibe to a Dracula movie, specifically one that's a sci-fi futuristic Western, how do you think that might work? Do you think that like Jacob was saying, the malleability of Dracula as a character, but like, what do you think about the the type of filmmaking that can be applied to a Dracula story. Do you think that's an interesting prospect there?
I mean, it would definitely be, like I said, unlike any Dracula we've seen before. Not so much Dracula. I don't know how that style lends itself to sci-fi, but that's because I'm probably just not being imaginative enough. And, that's what kind of makes this exciting, is that when I try to picture, this version of Dracula in my head, I can't really think of anything. Anything I think of is like, comical. And that's kind of what makes this exciting, is that, this story has been done to death. Dracula has been adapted countless times. And the idea of finding a way to do something new with it and do it in a serious way. Like, I don't think she's going to be making like a winking, tongue-in-cheek sci-fi Dracula Western.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea that she's taking that and applying it, with her sensibilities just makes this just intriguing, I guess is the word. Like, I just can't wait to see what this turns out to be.
Well, speaking of intriguing, Marvel Studios has hired a writer for its Blade reboot, and it's a sort of intriguing choice. Chris, tell us about that.
Yes, Stacy Osei-Kuffour, who wrote Watchmen, the HBO version of Watchmen, has been tapped to write the reboot, if you will, of Blade. Blade is, of course, the Marvel Comics character who's half human, half vampire. Wesley Snipes famously played the character originally. Mahershala Ali is going to be playing the new version that was announced at Comic-Con back in 2019. And we really haven't heard much about this since that announcement. That announcement was done in almost like a funny way, because it came at the very end of the Comic-Con panel. And since then, there's been next to no word about it. But now, Marvel has hired a writer. This makes her the first Black female writer of a Marvel Studios movie, which in itself is a big deal. And the fact that they have a writer indicates they're finally picking up steam with this. So now they have to find a filmmaker and all that jazz. But so this sounds like Blade is finally getting off the ground over at Marvel.
Chris, you and I and HT, we talked a lot about Watchmen when that show was on, and as you mentioned, this writer was one of the story editors and writers of that HBO series. But are there any other credits of hers that stood out to you that make her seem like maybe an interesting choice for a Blade project?
I mean, just that alone makes me interested, just because that Watchmen series, it seems like this won't work, but it turned out to be really well. She also wrote Run, or she was one of the writers on Run, the HBO series that only lasted one season and got canceled. But I really liked it, even though it seems like everyone gave up on it. And a lot of people did not like how that series ended. To be fair, that, the ending wasn't meant to be a series finale. It was supposed to be a season finale, and then the show got canceled, so it has that thing against it. But I really liked Run. She also wrote an episode of Pen 15, which I have not seen, but I hear people say good things about that show.
Yeah, that show is great. And I'm looking at her credits now. She wrote the Anna Ishii-Peters episode from season 1, and that's a really great episode. So, definitely some promising stuff here. Jacob, as a our resident comic book fan, I'm sure you have some opinions on Blade. What do you think about this new version with Mahershala Ali in the works, and then also this writer being attached to it?
Yeah, I was actually in the room when Mahershala Ali did the whole "I'm playing Blade" thing at Comic-Con. It really did kind of roll. I'm really interested and excited to see what this is, because Blade is such a strange fit for Marvel Comics already, and then there's the MCU. It's like, how do you fit Blade, the vampire hunting vampire, into the same world as Captain America and Iron Man? It just tickles me. It tickles me so much, the idea of like, let's just say, Winter Soldier finding Blade, and Blade saying, "Oh yeah, there's a vampire problem. Where have you been this whole time, fighting vampires all alone? And you're off doing what do you do? I'm saving the world from vampires."
Right.
I want to have that conversation. I want to see the conversation happen on screen. But yeah, I think the writer here is really a smart, strong choice. I mean, she has comic book bona fides, and she has the dramatic chops. Clearly, Watchmen is one of the great pieces of American art of the past few years. So I know Marvel tends to make a bit more mainstream, safe stuff, but mainstream and safe can also be really good and really fun. And I think Mahershala Ali and her is a really good start.
Yeah. All right, so moving on to our next story. This one was like maybe the biggest like Mad Libs style headline from last week, I think. So Mattel is developing an Uno movie with rapper Lil Yachty potentially starring. So he is also, I believe, executive producing this movie. The Grammy-nominated rapper Lil Yachty, who, as far as I know, does not have any film credits so far. I should probably look that up just to confirm. But we know that a writer named Marcy Kelly, who does not have any credits to her name yet, is writing the script for this Uno movie, which is, of course, based on the classic card game. But like, how do you turn Uno into a movie? And their answer is to turn it into a live action heist comedy that is, quote, set in the underground hip hop world of Atlanta. So, what? I'm. I mean, did you guys play Uno growing up? Are you guys familiar with this very basic, like, family friendly game? And then, can anyone, either of you, give me any sort of potential insight as to how this might be connected to the underground hip hop scene in Atlanta, Georgia? Chris, let's start with you.
Actually, I'm sorry, I didn't know. Let me interrupt. But I can guarantee what happened here, Ben.
Okay. Yes.
This was another screenplay about about a heist in the underground hip hop Atlanta scene, and they're trying to get it made. They reached out to all possible avenues, and Mattel said, "Put Uno in there, and we'll finance it." I guarantee you, it has to be a story here.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. I wonder if we'll actually get the truth behind that, like during this movie's press junket when it eventually if it eventually comes out. Chris, are you familiar with Uno, and what do you make of this insanity?
No, I have no. I've never played Uno. I don't really know. Yeah, I don't know. I've heard of it. Obviously, I know. I've seen it at like Target on the shelves, but I don't really know anything about Uno, honestly. So I just know this is going to be a wonderful movie, and it's going to win several awards.
Well, Jacob, as like the tabletop gamer among us, I assume you're familiar with like the mechanics of Uno. That's probably a game that you grew up with, right?
Yeah, Uno is fine. I mean, there are much better card games out there if you're a connoisseur, but it gets the job done. It's just a purely mechanical game. It's called a trick taking game in board game parlance, where you just like, take that, reverse this, change that. Mm-hmm. My card breaks the game. My card breaks the game back. It's the godfather of a lot of far superior modern card games. But this makes me really think, like I said earlier, if this is a heist movie, somehow the mechanics of the game will be reflected in the heist, because it's all about changing fortunes very suddenly in Uno. So
but how does like reverse or draw four, like how does that factor into a live action heist comedy? I have no idea. I don't think you can answer, Jacob. But.
I don't know. All I can guess is that the people pulling off this heist that's being talked about in the basic plot description probably play Uno, or somehow inspired by mechanics of Uno to make a mechanically sound crime plan. That's my guess. Ocean's 11, but instead of like a montage where they figure things out, they're playing Uno and go, what if we do it like this based on Uno? But like I said, there's literally, I cannot imagine a world where somebody said, let's write an Uno movie. This has to be an existing script that they said, oh man, we want to make this, but we need to make sure there's some franchise potential. That's all I can think, and I'm happy to be wrong. If you're involved in the Uno project, email us and let us know.
Yeah, that would be great. And I did not mean to denigrate Lil Yachty's filmography. Evidently, he has lent his voice to the character of Green Lantern in Teen Titans Go to the Movies, and then he played himself in the movie Long Shot. And he also starred in 2019's How High 2. So he has some credits before. But yeah, so there you have it. An Uno movie is in development. Who knows if it'll actually come out, but figured it's worth discussing. Chris, let's talk about another movie that's been in development for a long, long time. And this is a film based on the Broadway hit Wicked. And there's been some movement on that front. This movie has been in the works for a long time, but now it seems like maybe it's a little closer to actually happening.
Yeah, it's Wicked, based on the hit Broadway musical, which is based on a book, which is based on sort of a prequel idea for The Wizard of Oz. Has been attempting to come to the screen for a while now. For the longest time, Stephen Daldry, who directed Billy Elliot, was attached to direct it. And it even had a release date, and that release date was originally December 20th, 2019, a date which will live in infamy because that is the date that Cats ended up coming out instead of this movie. This movie has been delayed so long, they knocked it out of that release date and they put Cats in theaters that day instead. But now it looks like it's sort of picking up steam again because John M. Chu directed Crazy Rich Asians. And also directed the upcoming film adaptation of In the Heights, has been hired to direct this wicked movie. And that's really all we have at the moment. There's still no casting. There's no new release date. So we're going to have to wait and see how this turns out. But it does look like after, waiting the longest time, the film is finally sort of coming back together again.
So in the pre-COVID era, Chris, I know that you occasionally visited New York and Broadway and things like that. Did you ever see Wicked? Are you familiar with that story beyond just like reading about it in trade reports and write-ups that we've had to do for the site?
I've never seen it. I have listened to the songs, and several of them are very good. That the Defying Gravity song, which everyone knows is very good. So I am familiar with it. I have never seen it.
I think I saw it with my family when it came to Jacksonville, Florida, like many years ago. This is probably 10 years ago now at this point. Maybe long, actually, maybe like closer to 15 years ago. But man, it's a great show. I'm a little curious about how a movie version works, but I'm happy that John Chu is behind the camera here because he comes from the world of musicals a little bit, or at least like he definitely has like a musicality to his style. I mean, he is the guy who directed Step Up to the Streets, and he's directed Step Up 3D and the Justin Bieber Never Say Never concert documentary. He's stepped into sort of more, like mainstream blockbuster filmmaking with like G.I. Joe Retaliation and, as you mentioned, Crazy Rich Asians. But this seems to be sort of a return to that sort of like more musical style, sort of on the heels of the In the Heights movie that's going to be coming to HBO Max later this year. Jacob, are you familiar with Wicked? Have you seen that show or heard the score or the soundtrack rather?
I've never seen it, but I have listened to the soundtrack. It's good. I have a bone to pick with it because I think the book it's based on is a far superior piece of dramatic writing.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, but if this is the way to go adapt, because I know they're never going to adapt the book at this point because the musical is such a huge big deal. But the musical is good. At least the soundtrack's good. It's one of those cases where you listen to a soundtrack and have the Wikipedia description open so you can like read the plot between the song. Mm-hmm. I've done that with Wicked, but I've never actually seen it. But John Chu is interesting. I like him. So let's do it. If we're never going to get that miniseries adaptation of the book, I'll take this.
I'm curious about your opinion about the book. I've not read it myself, but a couple of the people that I have spoken with who have read the book said that they preferred the stage show to the book. So I'm curious why you are the opposite of that.
The case of the show says, what if the Wicked Witch of the West was actually good? And it's like, what if she's actually a good person and she's actually heroic the entire time, and here she is being misunderstood and being a hero. Whereas the book is, what if she wasn't a villain, straight up villain, but she was incredibly complex and prone to making poor choices and good choices and being an incredibly complex person whose life cannot be summed up by good or evil. And that to me is so much richer and interesting, but that's just me.
Gotcha. Okay. All right, let's go to our next item, which is the Game of Thrones prequel series, House of the Dragon, has found a composer for that show. Jacob, who is going to be heading to Westeros for that?
Yeah, they're bringing back Ramin Djawadi, the man who composed the score for Game of Thrones, the original series. And this feels like a no-brainer because I'll say as much. I usually cut the word iconic from every single article that's published on Slashfilm because I think it so rarely applies. And Ben, you wrote this article and you described Djawadi's score as iconic, and I struggled with whether to cut it, and I ended up cutting it, but it's as close to iconic as a musical score of the past decade could possibly be. I think that you think of Game of Thrones, you suddenly think of the you hear it in your head when you think of this. So I think to not bring him back would have been a serious misjudgment. As long as he doesn't like recycle too many old themes and recognize that this is a different era and different characters, and brings up something as equally earwormy as the original score. I think this is a great choice. Ben, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm curious. I agree. I think providing that sort of bridge makes a lot of sense, and the idea of being able to maybe recycle, or not necessarily recycle, but reincorporate or sort of build upon the Targaryen themes that he created for Game of Thrones, and then to sort of, I guess, like reapply those, or sort of build out different versions of those, almost like travel back in time and create a piece that feels like it would eventually evolve into that. Seems like what conceptually should happen, because this prequel series takes place, what is it, like a few hundred years before the events of Game of Thrones, and it involves the Targaryen dynasty. So it seems like there's a lot of cool opportunities to for people who love film and television scores. I feel like there's going to be a lot of for lack of a better term, like Easter eggs within the music, like little nods and motifs and stuff that are going to be recycled for people who are paying close attention to that stuff. I'm curious about the theme song, though, because that theme is so, forgive the word, iconic. Do you think that they're going to create a whole different theme song for this show, or do you think that is going to be the sort of blanket theme for all Game of Thrones materials, because it is so well known now, Jacob?
They need to do a new theme song. They need to differentiate this from Game of Thrones. It's its own thing. If they use that theme music, then I will immediately be angry, because I'm reminded of YouTuber Lindsay Ellis has a really great 3-part breakdown of why The Hobbit fails as a movie trilogy. One of her big points is that in a key action scene, they reuse the music, the Ringwraith theme from the original Lord of the Rings, for a non-Ringwraith scene in The Hobbit, and this really angers her, and she says things mean things, and I think about that a lot. Things mean things, and especially with a show like Game of Thrones, or where each house, each character has a familiar score, and that score means something, and House of Dragon needs to mean something on its own.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't want to, I don't think we have, but I just want to make sure that people know that like the rest of the Game of Thrones score is also incredible. There's that song Light of the Seven, which I feel like is honestly like one of the best pieces of music that's ever been composed for any television show. So there's a lot of unbelievable work that Djawadi did over the course of the 8 seasons of that show. It's not just the theme song that I sort of brought up there at the end, but
not to linger on this too much more, because we've gone long on the Game of Thrones score, but the use of the organ in the episode The Winds of Winter remains for me one of the greatest uses of music in any episode of television.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so let's move to our last story, and that is involving a Legend of Zelda live action TV series. I don't want to confuse anybody. It's not happening, but Chris, we now know why a live action show is not happening, or at least not yet. Tell us the update for why that show sort of fell apart.
Right. And I want to stress that I have my doubts about this story, but I reported it as is, because I'm committed to bringing you the facts, readers. But back in 2015, the Wall Street Journal posted a story saying that Netflix was developing a live action Legend of Zelda series. And then the show got canceled and we never saw it. And now, all these years later, Adam Conover, who is a comedian, he did voices on BoJack Horseman, and he had a show called Adam Ruins Everything. He was working on a completely different Nintendo adaptation, a claymation version of Star Fox.
And I'm going to stop you right there before you even go any further. This is the first time I've ever heard of the existence of that project, and that sounds kind of awesome. Do you know anything about like the Star Fox world, Chris? Did you ever play any of those games? Do you know those characters?
Here's my Star Fox story. When I was young, there used to be physical brick and mortar stores called Hollywood Video, and I rented Star Fox from there, and I tried to play it, and I couldn't get past like a few seconds of gameplay, because I am not a gamer, friends. So
was this like the Nintendo 64 era?
I can't even remember what system it was, because I didn't have a lot of systems. So it was whatever basic version was available of Star
Mhm.
Fox, and I was like, "Wow, I hate this," and I never tried to get any further. So that's the extent of my Star Fox knowledge.
Your grudge continues to this day.
Yes, go to hell, Star Fox.
Okay, sorry to interrupt. So this claymation Star Fox project was in the works, and
Right.
what did Adam Conover have to say?
So yeah, this was in the works at the same exact time, apparently. And Adam Conover recently appeared on a podcast. And he was telling the story, and according to him, he said Nintendo pulled the plug on both this and Zelda because of that Wall Street Journal leak, and the reasoning was they were angry about the story leaking out. And again, this is Adam Conover's word. I'm not calling him a liar. I'm sure this is what someone told him, but he doesn't really elaborate it on more than that. And I have trouble kind of believing that is the only reason that Nintendo was like, oh, someone heard we're making this. Well, then we're not going to make it. Like, it just seems like a very weird reason to pull the plug. At the same time, the reasoning seems to be that Nintendo is sort of jumpy when it comes to adaptations of their material because they really haven't had that many successes when it comes to turning their video games into movies or TV shows. You know, there's the infamous Mario Brothers live action movie, which is, you know, a famous flop. So that sort of seems to be the reasoning, that they're just skittish over there and they were unhappy that the word leaked out and they pulled the plug entirely. I personally feel like there has to be more to the story than that, but I couldn't find like any other reasoning when I was writing this, when I was looking around. So that's sort of the only reason we have to go on.
Yeah, and since these projects, or at least the live action Zelda one, was in the works at Netflix, if we were to take this story at face value, I feel like the only reason that the company would pull the plug on this is because they wanted to do like a completely surprise drop of the show, and because word came out, it like ruined the surprise, and they're like, okay, it's not worth it for us to do this unless we can completely control the narrative like all the way through. But that seems like a level of control that frankly I've never heard of. Having written about movies for many years at this point, I don't think I've heard of a story quite like this. So I tend to agree with you that there's probably something else going on there. But Jacob, as somebody who is familiar with the Zelda, that whole franchise, and I know you're very much like tapped into the video game news stuff, and also like theme park news, and there's like Super Nintendo World and all that. Have you heard anything else about this, or what's your take on this?
I haven't heard anything Chris has not heard, but I will say as much. I believe this, and the reason I believe this is that Nintendo is two things. One, it is protective of itself. It does not release a bad Mario game, does not release a bad Zelda game. It will delay and delay and delay until that thing is perfect. It is famous for making sure that first party Nintendo games have a seal of quality that cannot be beaten. Even if you don't particularly like a Mario game or a Zelda release, if it's not for you, it's usually because you don't enjoy a certain gameplay choice, or maybe it's something doesn't click with you, but it's not because they're bad games. Nintendo, they have this attention to quality that like makes every other entertainment company in the world look terrible. But also they're an eccentric company. They've turned down numerous offers to be bought out by larger corporations for tons of money. They zig when everybody else zags. Like they don't compete with Sony and Microsoft. When those companies started making these massive bricks of consoles that have the most power in the world, they made a Nintendo Switch, this tiny little handheld portable thing. And they make weird experiments. They're always goofing off, and they really exist in their own bubble. They make Nintendo products, things that they are excited by. So the combination of this protectiveness and this sort of willingness to not play by rules and exist by their own, internal logic suggests to me that whatever reason this was, if there is more or not, I'm 100% convinced that Nintendo, being the eccentric weirdo company that it is, saw these leaks as a sign of, we don't have control over this. This scares us. We're not going to risk tarnishing one of our most famous, well-regarded, and critically acclaimed brands.
Chris, I have to ask, have you ever had any Star Fox level disaster experiences playing any of the Zelda games? Have you ever played any of those?
No, I never played the Zelda games when I was younger. Now that I have a Nintendo Switch, which I use once every 6 months, I have the subscription, and they have like the classic Zelda versions on there. So I've played some of that. I haven't played what's it called, Breath of the Wild, that everyone talks about, because I've read that it's an investment game. You need to, it's all about like wandering around, and I'm not a gamer, and I don't have the patience for that. So I have, even though I hear it's a great, beautiful game, I've not pulled the trigger on it yet. So no is the answer to your question, Ben.
Yeah, 100 hours beat the game for me. So
wow. Chris, did you ever get very far in Untitled Goose Game? This is very far off the track, but
I beat that actually, and that was fun because it's the most laid back game in history. You're just a goose and you run around, and you're stealing shit, and there's not a whole lot to it. So I beat that in like 3 days, and then I kind of regretted it because I was like, well, I have no reason to play this game anymore. So I don't know.
Where's that movie, Hollywood? Cast Andy Serkis as the goose. Like, let's get this thing off the ground here. Come on.
Absolutely. I'd watch that.
All right, I think that's going to bring us to the end of today's episode of Slash Film Daily. You can find more about all of the stories that we mentioned on today's show at slashfilm.com and linked inside the show notes of this episode. This podcast is published every weekday, bringing you the most exciting news from the world of movies and TV, as well as deeper dives into the great features you can find on the site. You can subscribe to the show on Apple, Google, Overcast, Spotify, all the popular podcast apps, and send us your feedback, questions, comments, and concerns at peter@slashfilm.com. Make sure to leave your name and general geographic location in case we mention your email on the air. Don't forget to rate and review the podcast on iTunes. Tell your friends, spread the word. Thank you so much for listening, and we will talk to you all tomorrow.